Okay, good evening, everybody. We're picking up again now after the Yomim Noroim. I hope everybody had a wonderful Sukkot and the meaningful Yomim Noroim. We're now into the month of Cheshvan. Maybe just say a couple of words about the idea of Cheshvan. Of Shimshon Raphael Hirsch has a beautiful idea. The way you tell anybody, I think internationally, all over the world, the indication that you want somebody to be quiet and to listen is you do this. Shh. And in English we have the word hush, which clearly is connected with that sound of the air passing over the lips. Hush. He says that that's the sound of Cheshvan, the idea of the silence after the great storm-tossed days of the Yomim Noroim and all the emotional, spiritual experiences, the ups and downs that we've experienced. We have this period of quiet, which is essential for digesting, ingesting the messages that we received, the lessons that we learnt in the holy month of Tishrei. He says that the word Cheshvan is also connected to the Hebrew word chush, which means a sense. The silence of Cheshvan is paralleled by the silence of the senses. The senses all operate in silence. And the time of Cheshvan is designed, as I said, as a time of reflection. Maybe that's one of the reasons there are no festivals. In fact, that's one of the reasons it's called Mar Cheshvan, bitter Cheshvan, because there are no Chagim. Lasid Lavo, when the Beis HaMikdash will be rebuilt, B'ezrat Hashem, Dimheir of Yomeinu, Cheshvan will be Zoiche. The month of Cheshvan will be the month in which the temple will again be re-inaugurated. So it will have its own festival in the future. Anyway, we're back to Mesilas Yesharim, Baruch Hashem. We're in chapter 19, Yud Tes, and as it's been a little bit of a while, I think maybe we'll just refresh our memories that we're talking about the divisions, the Chelkei Chassidut of saintliness. I don't like the word saintliness, it sounds very Chassidut. Going beyond the letter of the law. As we said, the book is divided into two sections, what's called Tzidkut, which means righteousness. In English they translate it. But basically, righteous means doing what you should do. And Chassidus is going beyond the letter of the law. And he says that there are really three aspects, three divisions, three principles right back at the beginning. I'm just going to the beginning of chapter 19. I'm not going to go all the way back, but just Chelkei Chassidus Harishonim Haroshaim, Shalosha. The main three heads of what is Chassidus are three. B'maaseh, action, what it is that you actually do, the manner you do it, Siyas HaMitzvah, and the third is the kavanah, the intention. And I think we could probably paraphrase this into the three categories, which are the what, the how, and the why. The what is the actual action, what constitutes Chassidus. The how is how about you going that, how about you do it, the way you do it, and the third part, the kavanah, is the internal intention, the kavanah, the thoughts of the heart which go into this. So we are well into the chapter, and I'm going to just pick up is from the second division, second chelek of Chassidus, which is the Ofen HaYasiyah, the manner of doing the mitzvah. Now, and he also says that there really are, this is also divided into two sections, which are Yira Shemaim and Avas Hashem. Fear of heaven and love of Hashem. Yira always has to precede Ava. Fear in the sense of awe, in the sense of understanding to the maximum possible extent as a human being can, who it is that has commanded me to do this mitzvah, this commandment. the awe, and we're going to speak about that tonight, the feeling of overpowering majesty of Hashem, and the overpowering feeling of my own inadequacy when it comes to do His will. That's the awe, and then of course there's the love of Hashem that I have because Hashem loves me, He created me. Everything He does is for me. And I love Him. I love Him as a child loves a father, at least, and of course much more than that. So, he says, included in Yiras Hashem is humbling oneself before Him, feeling shame in approaching divine service, meaning davening. Now, he does actually speak quite specifically about prayer, but I think we can really apply these ideas, extrapolate them to all areas of service of Hashem, not just prayer, not just tefillah, not just davening. The name and honoring the mitzvot, he says, honoring the name of Hashem, honoring the Torah of Hashem. That's the yira we spoke about. Included in the love of Hashem are simcha. Ivdus Hashem b'simcha. A person should serve Hashem with great joy. The more he understands all the gifts that He's given, the blessings that He's bestowed upon him, the more joy he will have in his life. And the sense, the love is to be able to speak to Hashem, to communion, to communicate with Hashem, and also to be zealous about protecting Hashem's name, to guard Hashem's name, to stand up, so to speak, and be counted, and to be proud as to be one of those who are Yirei Shamayim, fears of Hashem. Fear is not a very PC word nowadays. You can't really talk about fear, but of course, it's very much a part of what we're talking about. Now he's going to speak now about the chief aspect of Yiras Hashem is the Yiras Aromamus, the fear of His exaltation. So, this is of course something that a person has to bear in mind all the time when he's praying. And it's not an easy thing to do. And not just praying. It's difficult. A person goes through his life, goes through his week, goes through his day, goes through his life. And unless he consciously makes an effort to make himself aware of Hashem's presence, which is the essence of Yiras Hashem. Shavisi Hashem lenegdi somid. I have placed Hashem in front of me at all times. It's a difficult thing to do. Most of us go through our lives with very little awareness of Hashem. Halavai, that when we stand in Tefillah, Shemona Esrei, we, at least for some moments there, have a concept of standing in front of Hashem, of being in Hashem's presence. But this, it says, Shavisi Hashem lenegdi somid. I'm supposed to constantly have Hashem in front of me. And there are ways that a person can increase this. I'm not going to say that you're going to be able to be aware of Hashem all through your day, all through your life. It's almost impossible except for somebody on a very high level. But whatever level we're on, we can always improve that. And I would suggest there's something that you can do which is actually very easy in theory and very difficult in practice, which is for, let's say, 5 or 10 times a day, not when you're davening, just to stop and think and say to yourself, there's a God in the world. That's all. There's a God in the world. Shavisi Hashem lenegdi somid. And I would suggest, in order to make it easier, that maybe keep a notebook. And excuse me. And every time that you manage to do this, to remember to do this, you put a little tick in your book, and you'd be surprised. Again, it's a very simple idea, but in practice you'll find that it's not so easy to carry out. But if you do this, this is something that will 100% improve enormously the sense of a person has of being in the presence of Hashem, that I'm placing Hashem in front of me. Of course, it's talking poetically. Hashem is everywhere at all times. But what I'm doing is to, so to speak, open up my eyes and see my mind and realize that I'm in Hashem's presence right now. That's something that we have to do. And as he said, the ikka of Yira is what's called Yiras Haromamus, the exaltation, the fear of Hashem's exaltedness. We spoke, and he said actually in chapter 24, we're going to say this in Chavdalad, that there are actually two kinds of fear. The lower level is what's called Yiras HaOnesh. We've spoken about this in previous meetings. That's the lowest level. That's the fear of being punished. I don't want to get hurt. Halavai that we could develop that kind of fear. Most of us have, it's problematic to find that even lower level of fear. Most of us think, it's a nice HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he's going to let me off. To actually be concerned about punishment is already in our generation quite a level. I always think that a person, I know when I used to go, now actually I went to the dentist yesterday, and Baruch Hashem, my tooth is a little bit sore, not so bad. But you go to the dentist nowadays, and it's a relatively benign experience. They get the gel and they smear that on your gum to start off with, and they numb that down nice and the gel doesn't really feel anything at all. Maybe it's a bit cold, and then they have a very, very thin needle that they put into the gum or wherever it is to numb the tooth area, and the anesthetics they have nowadays are pretty, sophisticated and work very well. I remember as a kid that we used to go to the dentist and there was no gel, and maybe it's like the imagination of one's youth, everything plays out bigger when you're a kid, but it seemed to me there was this huge, great, thick needle that they jabbed into your gum, and I remember really being scared about going to the dentist. Now, if a person, nobody likes pain, and the basic level of Yiras HaOnesh is to understand that there is something called pain, that when we do things which are wrong, there will be a totzah, there will be a result to that. That's the lower level. And as I said, that's a level that a person still has to work for, especially in our generation where all these things become somewhat unfashionable. But we're not talking about this now. He's going to be discussing in 24 the difference between the two. Now we are talking about something called, as he says over there, it's appropriate primarily for the unlearned and for the beginners in Hashem's service. So that's the entry level. Halavai, we should make that entry. But the goal is not to stay at that level. The goal is to attain a different kind of fear, which is what is called in English, what's the word? I've forgotten it. Okay, I forgot it. It'll come back to me in a second. There's another kind of fear of the awe. Baruch Hashem. A-W-E, the awe of Hashem. So it's clear, and we're going to see over there, the one has to precede the other. A person who just thinks he can have awe of Hashem without understanding that Hashem is in the position to punish him, that's not a real awe. All true awe is based on a certain degree of fear. The awe of the king. A king who has the power of life and death, the awe the person has for that king is infinitely greater than the quote-unquote awe, if there's any awe there at all, of somebody like a constitutional monarch who's a figurehead, who represents in some way the covered, the honor of the kingdom. But if he doesn't have power, then the awe that one feels is limited. That's what we're talking about here. When a person comes to daven, to do a mitzvah, whatever it is, as we said, he has to remember, is to put into his mind that he is praying in front of the Melech Malchei Hamlochim, the King of Kings. That's the ultimate level of Yiras HaRomamus, is to be constantly aware of Hashem's presence, and the fear at that level is not the fear of getting punished, the fear of doing something inappropriate, however small that might be. And that sublime level is known as Yiras HaChet, that's connected to Yiras Aromamus. Yiras Achet, the fear of sin, not the punishment of the sin, but the fear that in some way, Chas v'Chalila, I should be pogea, I should in any way blemish, I should anyway do something unworthy of Hashem's covered, is one of the most difficult traits for a person to attain. This is, the Yiras Aromamus is on a lower level. Again, so there are three levels of chet, of yira. Yiras oynesh, fear of punishment, Yiras Aromamus, awe of Hashem, and Yiras Achet, which is my feeling of constantly being concerned that I may do something inappropriate. The fundamental level is of Yiras Aromamus is that a person, when he comes to do a mitzvah, he davens to Hashem or whatever it is, that he should be keenly aware of Hashem's exaltedness and stand in awe in front of him. And Vahu Masha, his here, Hatana, that's the Tana of Rabbi Elazar, exhorted his disciples when he was on his deathbed. Ukisha'ata mispalel da lefi mi, lifnei mi ata mispalel. When you pray, know in front of whom it is that you're praying. So now, how does this thing doesn't come naturally? So there are really three steps to this. The first is that a person, as we mentioned this last time we met, I think, that Hashem gives us a power of dimion, of imagination. And it's not for naught that he gives us this power, because it's this power of imagination, of being able to conjure up in our mind, which is the first step to actually Yiras Aromamus, which is when a person davens to Hashem, he should have in his mind, imagine to himself that he is davening to the King of Kings. And even to the extent that, and of course one must never sort of think of Hashem in any physical way at all, but if he can conjecture in his mind this idea of the King of Kings sitting on his throne. And it's difficult because even though your eye doesn't see him, but a person is given this power of contemplation, of dimion and focus to etch that idea into his heart, as he says. B'mat hisbonenus v'simas leiv yuchal likboa b'libo amitas adava. Eich that it's possible to come and literally communicate with Hashem. I'm talking to Hashem. That's what a person, the first step is when he starts to daven, he should think in his mind, Hashem is listening to me. I am now communicating with Hashem, and even though I don't see him, I know he's there, and he's listening to me, and he cares, and he wants to hear what I have to say. For hu yizbarach shemo ma'azin loy, or makshiv l'devarov. In the same way, that when a person speaks to his friend he knows is attending to him and listens to everything he says. That, now I'm going to talk the second two parts of contemplation when a person comes to daven. So, once we've achieved that first stage, then, of course, he has to meditate on Hashem's greatness, his exaltedness, and that he's lofty beyond all blessing and praise. Asher hu meromam v'niskav al kol bracha usihila. That's Nehemiah, says it something like that. Al kol minei shleimus shetuchal more, much further than any perfection that we could possibly understand or comprehend. That's the second step. In other words, the first step, just thinking Hashem is in front of us, that's not enough by any means. Without a sense of awe and of Hashem's exaltedness, then that's not appropriate. The third level, and really the third level, is what allows us to get to, helps with that second level, which is very difficult, is to look at the corollary of Hashem's exaltedness, which is our lowliness. which is much easier to do. The person realizes that he's standing in front of the Melech Malchei HaMelachim, and he's full of things which are wrong, inappropriate feelings, inappropriate actions, inappropriate thoughts, inappropriate... We all know that we're human and we're very lowly, and that should evoke in us a corresponding yira and fear and awe of Hashem based on understanding how very, very low we are. So that's 1, 2, and 3. Knowing I'm speaking to Hashem, imagining that He's listening to me, realizing He's listening to me, using my power of imagination to focus and to make concrete these ideas, understanding Hashem's loftiness and understanding my lowliness, which of course will aid me in that second step. And he says, Ki al kol eileh efshar shelo yecherad libo velo yirash. It's a response, because if you think about these things, it's impossible that a person's heart is not going to tremble and quake. If a person really thinks about these things carefully, he'll realize he'll be in a state of fear. The fact that he's being allowed to speak to Hashem. And to mention Hashem's name. He's allowed his name. He can say the name, Yud Kei Vav Kei, the way we said, hopefully it's not the way it's written, but he can say Ado. And of course, a person wants to find favor with Hashem. The more you respect somebody, the more it's important to you that they think you're okay. And that's what it says, and it says in Tehillim. It says in Tehillim, Ivdu Hashem b'yira v'gilu b'iroda. Serve Hashem with fear and rejoice before Him in trembling. And that the service is, of course, of Hashem. Yeah. And, of course, the more a person's aware of Hashem, the more that engenders the fear of Hashem, and the more acute, the more a person is aware of Hashem, so the greater that fear is, as it says in the Pasuk about the angels. El na'arotz b'sod kadoshim rabba v'nora al savivov. Hashem, who is dreaded in the great council of His holy angels, and is awesome over all who surround Him, because Malachim, the angels, they are closer to Hashem in the sense that there's a greater revelation to the Malachim of Hashem than to us, who possess a material body which acts as a barrier for us perceiving Hashem. The Malachim are incorporeal, they have no bodies, and therefore they have an awareness of Hashem which is much greater, and therefore their fear is concomitantly greater than mankind's, than the human beings. It's easier for them. Kal lehem yosel the most shevach gedulosoi. It's easier for them to imagine the praise of His greatness. So, and therefore the fear of Him is much greater upon them than it is upon human beings. I just want to read something here from the Tur in Orach Chaim. He says that when a person prepares to daven, to pray, he should visualize the Shekhinah in front of him, and should think that if he were speaking before a king of flesh and blood, who is here today and in the grave tomorrow, he would prepare his words and concentrate on them carefully, lest he stumble. So all the more so, when one stands in front the Melech Malchei HaMelachim, the King of Kings, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Blessed One, the Holy One, blessed is His name, must he coordinate, prepare his thoughts, since thought is no different from speech before Him. Speech to a king of flesh and blood, the equivalent of that is thought. when we're standing in prayer. Because Hashem, as a king hears what you say, Hashem discerns your thoughts. And the Chassidim Rishonim, the early ones, used to do the following. They would isolate themselves and concentrate on their tefillot, their prayers, until they reached the point of being some kind of out-of-body experience. They were so overcome with ruchnius, so overcome through their ability to concentrate on their tefillot, on their davening, on their prayers, that they came actually quite close to the level of nevuah, of prophecy. That's the Torah in Orach Chaim, Tzadik Ches, Halacha Aleph. He brings more psukim here. Not just among the Malachim, even though the Malachim are on a higher level, but also mankind, it's possible to reach very high. David HaMelech, peace upon him, said, Haya Meshabech va'oimer, he would praise Hashem for the opportunity to serve him and say, I, through your abundant kindness, will enter your house and I will prostrate myself towards your holy sanctuary. It's also written, Mipnei Shemi Nichashu. It's written that Aaron and the whole tribe of the Kohanim, about them it says, my covenant was with him, with Aaron, life and peace I gave them to him for the sake of fear with which he feared me, for he was humbled before my name. I'm filling in the pasuk there. For Omer it says, Elokai boshti. Ezra said, Hashem, I was embarrassed, v'nichlamti, and ashamed, lahorim Elokai ponai elecha, to lift my face to you, oh my God. So he says also now an interesting thing, and with this we'll finish, I think, today. V'ulam hayira hazois tzarich she's gaber believe betchila v'achakach tar'eh puloseo gam be'evarei. He said that in truth this fear actually has to start in the heart, and it has to work its way from the inside out until it manifests itself in the limbs of the body. And we're going to see what this means in terms of where a person looks, maybe even bowing down, lowering the eyes, folding of the hands, things we're going to come to next week. The question I just want to end with today is, if you remember, and it's interesting, I was thinking of this when I saw here actually, he brings from Rav Yecheskel Sana in Iyunim, in his version of Mesilas Yesharim. If you remember back in Perek Zion, the Ramchal brought a principle down which is well known of Achrei Pa'ulos Nimshechim Alavovos. After the actions is drawn the heart. We tend to think that a person thinks a certain way and therefore they feel a certain way and therefore they act a certain way. So the Mesilas Yesharim over there says that's true, but also the reverse is true. That the actions of a person influence the way he feels, and the way he feels then influences the way he thinks. This is basically the idea of behavioral psychology. That if you get a person to act a certain way, that will impact on his feelings and his mental state. It's been said that that's one of the reasons we put on the tefillin on the arm first. First of all, we have to do the action. And the action then, when you do that leads to the heart. And when the heart is connected then to the actions has informed the heart. So only then is it possible to put on the tefillin of the rosh, of the head. Here he's saying the other way around, that in point of fact, Yiras Shamayim, fear of Hashem, has to be something which comes from the inside out. Rav Yecheskel Sana says that technique is out of place here. Because fear of Hashem must begin internally, and only then will it naturally manifest itself externally. At the end of the day, though, there is a stira here, and Rav Yecheskel Sana has his teretz. I don't know. It seems to me that there is a stira, and sometimes when you have a contradiction, it's obviously sometimes you just have to leave the contradiction as it is. Maybe we could say, similarly to the way Rav Sana Zatzal says, that when something which is so abstract, something which is so removed and really from physical action, fear of Hashem and talking awe of Hashem, that's something that, so to speak, has to be ignited. A person has to ignite in his heart first. And while it's true that the actions lead to feelings and feelings lead to thought, but at the end of the day, maybe we could say that that can be no more than the action. Something which is so supernal, so muvdal, so elevated as Yerei Shamayim, has to find its own spark of existence, has to start off in the person's heart. Okay, we'll continue next week. Thank you very much.